Good morning, everyone, and welcome. My name is Logan Noonan, Program Specialist for the Implementer-Led Design, Evidence, Analysis, and Learning, or IDEAL activity, calling in from Washington, D.C. I'd like to welcome you to this event to share the results and recommendations from the Assessment of USAID BHA Sustainability Guidance for Food Security Activities from 2015 to 2021, study which was conducted by the Past Forward Project at the Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy at Tufts University. After some brief opening remarks, we will hear a presentation of key findings from the study, followed by an opportunity for Q&A with the study authors. Then we will move into a breakout room activity to brainstorm next steps in improving and applying BHA's Sustainability Guidance to RFSAs. At any time during the event, please feel free to drop your questions into the Q&A feature, and we will address as many as possible during the Q&A portion. I will now hand it over to Corinne Garnier, Knowledge Management and Organizational Learning Advisor for the Applied Learning Team at USAID's Bureau for Humanitarian Assistance and Activity Manager for the IDEAL activity, for some brief remarks.
Thank you, Logan. This is a great pleasure for me to welcome you all in this session. This is a really important piece of work that BHA has committed to through the support of IDEAL and the technical leadership of Tufts University, Friedman School of Nutrition Past Forward team, and we'll hear much more from them pretty soon. The partnership and leadership of Tufts University on this front is not new. Indeed, this assessment builds on the foundational work that Tufts University carried in 2015 under FANTA, 12 activities, 4 countries, multi-year studies that documented the factors promoting sustainability post-exit. This led to the establishment of a conceptual framework that laid out essential components for sustainability that I'm sure we will hear more from the team, that BHA, then FFP, fully adopted in the support of its activities. As well, BHA commitment to sustainability is long-standing. Since 2003, that is 20 years ago, BHA, then FFP, started to request sustainability strategies. And based on the foundational work of Tufts University under FANTA in 2015, in developing the sustainability framework, BHA started to require sustainability and exit plan to be submitted in the application for resilience food security activities, based on providing guidance based on the study finding and the conceptual framework. This guidance has evolved over time, and so is the experience of partners developing and implementing the sustainability and exit plan. By taking a critical look at our guidance and its application through this work that you will hear about today, we are taking an open and transparent way to improve our programming. We take USAID, BHA, we take the result of this assessment at heart and will be further discussing it internally. It is important to recognize that both BHA and our partners, the past, present, and future, all have key responsibilities in supporting the capacity for and the quality of sustainability planning. This work truly can go as far as you, our partners, can take it. It is our hope that in this session, we hear from our partners, the main audience of this event, and we hear what you see is needed, what you can also do better or differently beyond what BHA can and should do. We are all excited to listen to the results of the study and engage with you all in this session. So thank you so much, Ideal. Thank you, Tufts University. Thank you, all of you, for being here with us today. And with this, I'll pass it back to you, Logan.
Thank you, Corinne. Before we start, I'd like to introduce the co-facilitators for today's session. First, we have Susanna Mari, IDEAL's Acting Activity Director, who will be co-facilitating this session. And then we have Beatrice Rogers, Principal Investigator for Past Forward at the Tufts University Friedman School of Nutrition Science and Policy. Then we have Jennifer Coates, Principal Investigator for Past Forward.
Hello, everyone.
Bridget Levan, Researcher for Past Forward.
Hi.
And Nina Yang, Researcher for Past Forward.
Hey, everyone.
And with that, I'll hand it over to Nina to kick off the presentation.
Thanks very much, Logan. So I'll be kicking off with a few introductory slides on the Past Forward study. Next, please. We wanted to put today's presentation in perspective through this timeline, which echoes a lot of the milestones that Corinne had mentioned in her opening statement. This shows BHA's commitment to improving post-activity sustainability since as early as 2003, and the partnership with Tufts Friedman School along the way. Notably, this does include the Rogers and Coates Sustainability Study from 2015, and I'll dive into that a little bit more in the next slide. But in addition to, again, some of the milestones that Corinne had mentioned, we also wanted to highlight a few other ways that BHA has promoted sustainability within RFSAs. For example, in 2018, BHA developed a market-based approach to improve the sustainability of local service providers and piloted this approach in Bangladesh. And additionally, in 2020, BHA began funding the Program Cycle Support Associate Award, as we all know as PCS, to provide facilitation and capacity strengthening support to RFSAs, which includes support for sustainability and exit planning. Next slide. So here you will see the sustainability framework from that 2015 Tufts-Fanta study. We'll be referring to these concepts throughout today's findings, so we wanted to provide a very brief refresher. The overall framework identifies factors that must all be in place in order for behaviors and for service provision and service utilization to be sustained post-program. These factors are motivation, resources, capacity, and often, but not always, linkages. The final critical component is to build in a gradual handover from award-funded implementation towards local responsibility. The 2015 study also highlighted the need to account for external factors or shocks that might threaten the sustainment of services, behaviors, and outcomes. And these are all themes or concepts that carry forward to today's presentation. Next slide. So with those background concepts in mind, the objective of today's Past Forward study is to learn from the past 5 to 6 years of experience, particularly about the clarity, comprehensiveness, and feasibility of the evolving sustainability guidance. The findings presented today will be structured along these 3 research questions. First, we will describe how the RFA guidance and requirements on sustainability have evolved since 2016, and then we'll delve into the extent to which awardee plans met those requirements. The final section of findings will touch upon other aspects of RFSA's experience as they seek to implement their plans. We wanted to note that this study is not an evaluation of the likelihood of sustainment outcomes from recent RFSAs. Instead, it's meant to unpack the evolving sustainability guidance and partners' perceived ability to incorporate it within their activities in order to support the overall strengthening of future initiatives. Next slide. So in general, we had three components to our methodology. First, we began by conducting a systematic document review of 11 RFAs and their accompanying country-specific information documents. This covered all of the RFAs issued between 2016 and the Haiti RFA in 2021. We additionally included one RFA from 2015 due to its role in piloting the market-based approaches I previously mentioned. We also conducted a review of external documents referenced in these RFAs. For the second component, 27 of the 28 awarded RFSAs shared their application and activity documentation for this study. There was a bit of variation in the breadth of documents received from each award. For example, some RFSAs provided only the final awarded application, while others provided issues letters and responses, and 5 of the 28 RFSAs provided post-refinement theories of change. Our past forward review of documents was based on whatever was shared with us. The third and final component of the study consisted of interviews with both headquarters and field staff who worked on application development, application evaluation, refinement, and implementation. In total, 23 interviews were conducted with current and former staff from 6 RFSAs and also from PCS. 9 interviews were conducted with current and former BHA staff who are familiar with RFA scoring, procurement, or the implementation of DISAs and RFSAs. Next slide, please. And here is a map, a visual representation of the 12 countries covered by the 26 RFSAs in the study. We reviewed RFA documents and program documents from all of them. And the orange circles designate the locations for the 6 RFSAs, selected for key informant interviews. These 6 RFSAs were selected based on characteristics such as geographic diversity, different years of implementation, different prime implementing partners. Next slide, please. And with that, I will hand it over to Dr. Rogers to walk us through some of the main findings and recommendations from the study. Over to you, Pete.
Super. Thanks very much, Nina. And so next slide, please. So I guess I'd like to start with giving just a big, the 50,000-foot view of the key takeaways that we had from this study, and then I will go and give a little more detail, and I hope weave in some of the recommendations that emerged from this study. So can I have the takeaways, please? All of them? Thank you. Thank you. So one of the things we consistently found is that BHA and Legacy Food for Peace, but BHA has increasingly put emphasis on sustainability. And I have to say, I think we all felt that BHA as a learning organization has really focused on the importance of sustainability as part of the planning for RFSAs. The specificity has increased, the detail has increased, and the attention to specific contextual factors has increased. So that we felt, I guess I'm just going to say, I think that reflects very well on this process and the importance that's given to sustainability. And the other thing we observed is that when we looked at the RFAs and we looked at the awarded applications, the applications were very responsive to the RFAs. And the importance of that as a key takeaway is that the development of the RFA matters a lot, the prescriptiveness, the detail, and as I'll mention a little later, the importance of having good guidance and some flexibility, because the RFA is going to be the guidepost for applications. Another thing that we noticed is that the emphasis on sustainability was strong, and the guidance increased during the application period. But we felt that as the activity continued, and particularly during the refinement period, that sustainability wasn't always explicitly included in the modifications that came out of the refinement period. And since that's where the plans can adapt to the local situation and be based on experience, that was I think the kind of overall takeaway is that there are opportunities to emphasize sustainability planning throughout the life of the activity. Every time that the activities are modified, the implications for sustainability, I guess I'm coming on to recommendations now, should be part of that. So we'll talk a little bit about the different actions that BHA and the awardees can take to improve and to improve and enhance their ability to encourage sustainability. So next, please. Thanks. So so now I'm going to get a little bit more detailed with looking first at the RFAs that we looked at, and then at the applications that were in response to the RFAs. So first of all, as I've mentioned, the RFAs put an increasing emphasis on sustainability and exit planning overall, gave better guidance. And one of the things we saw is they all asked for a project description to include that. But some of the RFAs explicitly said we want to see personnel assigned to sustainability planning and implementation. One of the things we saw is that the CLA, collaborative learning and adaptation, when it was discussed, capacity building was mentioned, but not so much in connection with sustainability, more in terms of the implementation. And I'd say with the monitoring and evaluation guidance, we noticed an evolution in the guidance that's provided on monitoring and evaluation. But again, even though sustainability was mentioned in the later versions, the M&E guidance didn't reference sustainability. There's one exception, Mali. But again, I'm sort of segueing toward recommendations. As monitoring and evaluation is carried out, we didn't see incorporated in that the importance of measuring progress towards sustainability in following benchmarks. Now, one of the things we did see is starting in 2020, applicants were asked to prepare a specific annex that was called the Sustainability Transition Plan. And what that did was it gave a very explicit requirement to explain the sustainability plan for each activity. That was a positive in the sense that it did require a focus on that, on the sustainability framework, and the putting it in an annex meant it didn't have to comply. It didn't have to comply with page limits. So that was a benefit. I will mention, and I'll talk about it a little later, that the annex also asks, please develop a backup plan. What will you do if you don't succeed with your first efforts at promoting sustainability? And that was something which I'll get to later, but that was something with which a number of respondents said would make sense to put in after the refinement when we know what worked and didn't work. The other thing was that scoring was attached to the sustainability plan. So now it wasn't just a general thing, but specific points were given for sustainability. Now, one of the very important takeaways is that the guidance, and when I get to the applications, I'll repeat this again, didn't emphasize the need to incorporate all of the sustainability factors. So you saw that little framework: motivation, capacity, resources, often linkages, always should be thought about, and the gradual transition. And one of the things we saw with the RFAs is that all of those components were mentioned, but the emphasis on they're all needed was not as strong as it could have been. And we did see that capacity building and linkages were mentioned more, and motivation and resources not as explicitly in some of the later RFAs. And the other thing we found was that in the section on sustainability, new, I'm going to say additional factors were listed as components of sustainability, things like layering and sequencing. So some of these are things that most of the people in this audience will have heard about and know about. But there was the framework from the Tufts Fanta study and additional factors. So next slide. Next slide, please. So I've said already that the RFAs gave increased emphasis on sustainability, and in particular, the later RFAs put an emphasis on the importance of this gradual transition to independent operation. Certain interventions were specifically discouraged, and certain interventions were specifically encouraged in many of the RFAs. In particular, the fee-for-service model was promoted, and the use of volunteers was discouraged. But there were certain things that were very specific. One of the RFAs even required the fee-for-service model. And again, I'm going to leap toward our recommendations, but different models and approaches are appropriate in different settings and different contexts, and for different sectors: health, agriculture, livelihoods. So along with specificity and examples, which are very good, flexibility to present and justify the appropriate sustainability plan seems to be very important. Now, one of the things it's worth paying attention to is we all know that providing free, I'm going to say free stuff, food or vouchers or inputs and stuff, that providing resource transfers that are unrequited, I'm going to say, poses a specific challenge for sustainability. And in the RFAs, applicants were asked to say, what is this free provision which can't continue after the program? What is this free provision going to promote or incentivize that is going to result in sustainability? So resource transfers need a special sustainability consideration. That's thing one. And the other thing in the RFAs is that many of them mentioned a possibility of an extension of the 5-year life of the activity. And the important thing, I think, there is that it wasn't consistent or always very clear. What were the criteria for getting an extension? Excellent performance or evidence of the need for further progress, and whether those extensions were implementation extensions or whether they were extensions designed to allow for a longer period of transition to independent operation. So in those RFAs, those were some of the things that we noticed in reviewing them. So next slide, please. So as I've said, we're looking now transitioning to looking at the applications. When BHA issues an RFA, to nobody's surprise, the applications reflect what's in the RFA. And therefore, the RFA needs to be carefully constructed. We felt that was a very important takeaway. We did find that the plans became more detailed, and I've mentioned this annex that was required that sort of forced a very explicit focus on sustainability. It increased the detail, it increased the focus on the gradual transition, and that it certainly made it easier to make some judgments about the RFSA. But people did say that it was burdensome, and I think there's a fine line there in saying we need the level of detail, and in particular that the sustainability plan focused in the annex was the request is to focus on each activity's sustainability plan. And one of the things I've mentioned that we've concluded is that in most of the applications that we looked at, they were more detailed, they were more thorough, but few of them complied with all of the criteria that we are that we've mentioned, that all three: sustainability, motivation, capacity, resources, and gradual transition. It's not a pick and choose, it's all of them are needed. So out of this review, one of our recommendations is, I think I've mentioned this from the RFA perspective, that sustainability strategies, models, and approaches should be based on evidence of successful models in different contexts. And as a result, the recommendation is we need to continue building an evidence base on what works in what contexts and under what circumstances and for which sectors. And that evidence base can be based on what's already in the literature, but also we would say also a further empirical ex post evaluation of what works and what doesn't. So some flexibility and also more evidence of what works and doesn't in what contexts. Next, please. So as I've said, one of the things we discovered is that the sustainability and exit plans complied with the RFA guidance, were improved in specificity and detail, but at the same time, paying attention to this confluence of all of the necessary components was not something that we saw. Very few plans managed to identify for each behavior or each service or each component what was going to be sustained and how, and paying attention to all the sustainability factors. And the other thing was that, and this is something that has come up in terms of the applicant's request for more guidance, benchmarks for monitoring progress towards sustainability were lacking in many of them. So not just this is our plan, but how are we going to know that we're achieving it? We found, now I mentioned that the refinement period is a period when there should be an opportunity to say, okay, we've got a year of experience, we're modifying our activities explicitly. How is that going to affect the sustainability plan and the factors that are incorporated in that plan? The other place where there was an opportunity that wasn't always taken advantage of to incorporate sustainability was in the theory of change. The original theory of change, and in the cases when we saw it, the theory of change that was modified after the refinement period and presented in culmination, that we didn't see consistently that sustainability concerns were incorporated into the modified theory of change. And we found that as I've mentioned, the M&E plans also didn't incorporate explicitly how are we going to monitor whether that progress towards sustainability is being achieved. So our recommendations are, first of all, that it would be really useful to think about, and we have a couple of suggestions, ways to ensure that the gaps in the understanding of what constitutes sustainability plan, a good sustainability plan, that there are still gaps in inconsistency in the nuanced understanding of what goes into it. And then the other thing is that the opportunities besides in the activity plan, that there are opportunities to incorporate sustainability that aren't being taken advantage of, specifically incorporating it into the original theory of change, incorporating sustainability into the refinement period, the modified theory of change, and the M&E process. Next, please. So we did hear from the awardees that they faced challenges operationalizing the guidelines at the different stages. And there are a couple, I'm going to make a couple of just comments that there was concern about the level of detail that was needed and how burdensome that was. But at the same time, a pretty significant level of detail is necessary to be able to develop a sustainability plan that explicitly addresses all the components for each component or sector or behavior or outcome that's needed. And so that, again, it's a fine line, but even though it's challenging, the annex provided some guidance and support for that, and the emphasis on all the factors and all the factors applied to each activity or each component, that's something that really is needed in order to have a complete sustainability plan. Now, another thing that was mentioned is this issue of the separation between, and many of you in this room will be very aware of this, the separation between the writing team, which is typically a headquarters-based team, and the implementation team, which is typically in country. And I think that's one of the rationales for the refinement period, is to take very well-designed plans, put them on the ground, and see how they work. And the last thing that we heard, the last thing on this slide that we heard from the awardees was that there is a disconnect between the way information is requested at the application stage and the way the same information is requested in subsequent stages of the implementation, where evaluations and progress reports and so on are being prepared. And that seems like a fairly achievable or remediable, a remediable situation. If it's the same information, can it be somehow made more amenable to being presented in one consistent form? So not requiring a reformulation when the information is the same. And I think that's the critical thing. I think we're at next, please. So yeah, so again, keying off the experiences that we heard from a lot of you guys in the room, from the implementing partners, is that we saw that the refinement period wasn't as apparent as it at the culmination as we felt it should be. That an important thing about implementation, and I think this issue of timeline is one that's worth that's worth emphasizing is the timeline for implementation is very tight. Awards are 5 years. The first year is refinement. Increasingly, the RFAs say you should be focused, and of course it's true, you should be focusing on a transition to independent operation at certainly by year 4. That's a very tight timeline. And one of the things that comes out of that is, I mentioned that a number of the RFAs talk about having an opportunity to do an extension period. That extension period, it would be really useful for the implementing partners to know the purpose, the criteria, and whether or not that's going to be awarded, because clearly it's going to help planning. It's going to help planning if they know early whether there's going to be an opportunity to extend the period of transition. So institutionalizing that process and of awarding an extension is something that could be considered as a way of making it easier to implement. I'm not talking about implementing activities, implement the transition to independent operation. And just in that vein, what I did want to mention that the guidance and the applications sometimes blurred. What are we doing for impact, and what are we doing for sustainability of impact after exit? And those aren't always the same. Sometimes maximizing immediate impact needs to be a little bit of a trade-off against longer-term sustainability. And in terms of all the elements of system, when I've said including sustainability concerns and activity plans at every stage, that's precisely for that reason, that focusing on impact and focusing on what's going to be the longer term, those are two critical pieces, not just one. So I've talked a little bit about the timeline. The other thing which you are all, I'm very, very aware of, is that the external environment is unpredictable, or sometimes predictable that there will be disruptions. So it could be civil disruption. I mean, we saw in some places, not just climate shocks and natural disasters, but civil disruption, civil unrest, even terrorism. And thinking about how those kinds of, I don't like to say unexpected, we know that in the period of 5 years, there will be some changes to the operating environment, and those should be incorporated in terms of what can we think about that would be resilient to those kinds of disruptions, right? Is there something that can be done to create a better, more enabling environment? So that was another piece of the concerns that need to be built into sustainability. Next. So, and I believe I think this is the last of our results slides, that we did see that even though there have been really commendable efforts to build capacity, that there still are capacity gaps, and that's on both sides. So just differences in the individuals or in the frameworks that are provided, that there should be more, I'm not going to say more, I'm going to say a continued effort to build capacity on both sides of understanding the nuances of the of sustainability and sustainability planning. We heard from a lot of people that the in-person workshops, we attended a couple of those, in-person workshops where the awardees have the opportunity to interact with PCS and with the BHA and present their experiences, we heard from a lot of people that those are a very rich environment for learning about things that have been tried and worked in different contexts. And so one of our recommendations is that those opportunities to share in workshops and meetings, that those are really worthwhile opportunities, and they should be encouraged and continued. I've mentioned the need for continued emphasis on understanding sustainability and continued learning. And the other thing, which was very, I guess, very nice to hear, is we heard from a lot of our informants in discussions that they were saying, you know, sustainability focus shouldn't be limited to BHA and RFSAs, that really we would like to see these explicit sustainability concerns applied more broadly in development and humanitarian interventions. And of course, that reflects to some extent, I'd like to think, the idea that this focus on sustainability for for all of the recommendations that we've been able to make, that the focus on sustainability is in fact something that is beneficial and would be beneficial more broadly applied. Thank you very much. And I think what we're going to do now is open the floor up to comments, questions, answers, and then we will go, I'll allow my colleagues to go into breakout groups. So for handling the Q&A session, I'm going to hand the virtual gavel to my colleague, Jenny Coates.
All right, terrific. Thank you so much, Bea. And thank you for everybody who has already entered questions into the Q&A. So if you haven't yet and you have a burning question that's on your mind, feel free to drop it in the Q&A. Before we get to answering some questions, I just wanted to very briefly acknowledge someone that we didn't get to acknowledge in the beginning of the presentation, who she wasn't able to be here today. That's Hulta Trendafili. She's a senior researcher supporting our team and has been a critical part of the Tufts project all along. So, so we have a terrific set of questions already that have come through, and I'm going to try to parse through these and kind of allocate them to our various team members. So the first question that has come up is one that, we heard some feedback on this in a session that we held with the implementing partners that had participated as informants or as, providing documents for the purposes of this study. So the question relates to the theories of change and asking, pointing out the fact that theories of change at proposal submission are already quite complex. And, I'm gauging some concerns about, what would it take in order to integrate these sustainability considerations at the proposal stage versus a little bit later on, perhaps as part of the refinement work. So this is something we've talked quite a bit about within our team as well. And Bea has her hand up, so I'm going to call on Bea to respond. Thanks, Bea.
Well, I'm just going to say that I think one of the themes that I hope was woven through the report and my presentation and what we've been talking about is when activities are being planned, sustainability should really be woven into that. So we did hear, oh, the theory of change is so complicated and adding yet another layer is very challenging. And that theories of change are certainly very challenging. But that thinking that says, while we're developing our theory of change, that theory of change includes theory of persistent change. And so I'll let others weigh in, but I think one of my responses to that is, it doesn't need to be a separate theory of change about sustainability. It needs to be, oh, what of these activities has built into it the potential for being sustained? I don't know if that's a satisfying answer, but That's my thought.
All right, thank you, Bea.
Now I'll shut up.
No, not at all. But maybe just for the moment. Yes, so we also had a question that I think might require a little bit further clarification for our team from the person asking the question, but asking whether there was an attempt to find the linkage between secondary adoption, or SA, and sustainability. Pointing out that one school of thought is that activities and approaches with higher secondary adoption also have higher sustainability. So I'm not familiar with that specific term. My interpretation of that is that it refers to secondary adoption as in kind of diffusion of the innovation. In other words, are there behaviors that were originally conveyed perhaps to one set of participants in which we see the behavioral adoption transmitting or diffusing to other participants or other non-participants for that matter. So feel free to clarify in the Q&A if that's not the case, but in the meantime, we can speak to that question. I will just say that it's a really good question, and in the prior Fanta study that we conducted, this was something that we did notice. It wasn't an explicit study question of ours, but it was something that emerged in several of the successful models where we had seen secondary adoption occurring during the life of the project. This was also often an indication that that after the project, there was more likely to be continued success because it showed interest, feasibility, and many of the factors, perhaps not all of the factors that we also saw are critical to sustainability were kind of manifested by that type of secondary adoption. I would say that though we need more kind of intentional study of that question, secondary adoption during the life of the project, however, is not necessarily a guarantee of sustainability, because there could be factors that facilitate secondary adoption, such as structures that are in place during the life of the project that are no longer going to be in place after the project ends. And so in any event, it is I think, potential, but not definitive sign that something is likely to be sustained on the part of beneficiaries or on the part of service providers. Thank you. Okay, so next, I'm going to focus this next question to Bridget. We have a question here about looking at the linkages between sustainability and resilience.
Thank you. So let me start with, we did not set out to answer this specific question, but we did find linkages between sustainability and resilience. First, some of the RFAs, especially the more recent RFAs, like the Malawi and Madagascar RFA in 2019 and the Ethiopia RFA in 2020, listed resilience, but they worded it as anticipating and managing shocks and stressors. They identified that as what we called an other sustainability factor, where those RFAs specifically used language that said applicants needed to describe their plans for anticipating and managing shocks and stressors as a way to promote sustainability post-program. So that was one way we saw that linkage. We also saw several of the RFAs require key staff positions that were resilience focused. I noted one in Malawi from 2019. Also, Haiti required a resilience and sustainability senior advisor. So the RFAs, especially these recent ones, are making this connection. In the applications themselves, again, for the more recent applications, we saw resilience come through for this reason. So if the RFAs were requiring it, the applicants delivered on it, generally speaking, in their applications. We saw, for example, the external environment coming through in the applications and ways to hedge against shocks and stressors as ways that applicants were trying to make that linkage between resilience and sustainability. I think one other example that I wanted to highlight was in our interviews, in our key informant interviews. Again, as we were talking with informants about the external environment, we heard a good example about how some activities are explicitly trying to align their approaches to national strategies in their host countries, not just for impact during the life of the program, but there is a belief that if they align their approaches with national plans and strategies, that in the case that shocks and stressors happen, that the host government will be more likely to continue supporting those, prioritizing those particular activities in the future. So that's where we're seeing the linkage between sustainability and resilience.
Great, thank you, Bridget. So we have a few questions here about, I'm just going to kind of group them for the sake of time, kind of asking for some additional resources, I would say. So one has to do with kind of examples of theories of change and how sustainability can be integrated into theories of change. And another question relates to whether or not there are available indicators and milestones that I'm assuming that implementing partners can draw on as examples for their monitoring system. So just to speak very briefly to the indicators and milestones, even though it's something that, Tufts, we noted back in the original Fanta study and has emerged from this study as something that's really important. It's not something that Tufts or Fanta were directly involved in. I believe, and someone from BHA can speak to this perhaps later, that this is something that BHA has very much on its radar. There was a monitoring and evaluation workshop that was held last year to begin the process of thinking about how to develop and integrate considerations of sustainability into monitoring systems. So that would include this question of sustainability related benchmarks. And we certainly have some thoughts on how that could also be done. Then with regard to the, excuse me for a second, we just have one minute left for questions. So I'm going to just try to cover a couple more quickly. We have a question related to the sustainability differentiation by sector. And is that something that, Bridget, you would mind addressing? So the question being, did we see differentiation by sector in terms of the types of sustainability strategies that were existed?
So we didn't specifically analyze deeply for these sector differences. They did emerge. So I'd like to encourage you to look at our report for some specific examples. I'll give you a good one that we saw, that watershed management, for example, and we think it was because there was so much guidance provided in the RFAs that we saw really strong sustainability plans for watershed management in particular. Rather than necessarily sectors, we see different types of maybe approaches where we saw differentiated findings in terms of the ability to explain motivation factors versus capacity factors with differing levels of detail.
Thank you. So there are several other terrific questions in the Q&A, and I'm sorry that we have to transition now to our next stage of the workshop. But just know that, we have some additional opportunity for all of you to ask some of these questions in the context of your breakout groups, and we'll have a little bit more time today to continue discussing. Thank
Thanks, Jenny. I want to go ahead and give Karine and Taka from BHA a chance to I think quickly respond to one of those questions.
Great.
Yeah, please, Taka, I wanted to ask him to go online, our M&E advisor, please.
Thank you. On the issue of indicators, we are working on indicators, but our guidance or our guidance is for partners to have process indicators that can be able to measure the progress of their sustainability, especially on their local service providers. And this requirement would also start from day one when you develop your M&E plan, so that you can also have sustainability indicators to measure some of the processes and some of the outcome to see what's working and what's not working. I think for now, that's what I might say, that we are looking at the long term for developing further indicators, but for now, partners are required to have their own custom indicators. We're also looking at other indicators that have come from other RFSAs, so that we can have an indicator bank, but this will not be something that we are requiring partners to do, but they can look at how other people have devise their indicators, and probably if something is applicable to them, then they can pick from there, or they can tweak those indicators to fit their own context.
Thank you, Taka. And thank you everyone for your questions, and to the Tufts Pass Forward team for their answers, their presentation, and for all of their work on this project. I encourage all of you to read the full report and get some more answers to your questions, or maybe it raises some more questions. But the good news is that we have more time together to be able to discuss, to think on those recommendations, and see what other questions we can those might raise, or brainstorm answers together about how we can work and support the recommendations. So we're going to divide into small groups, and then we'll come back to plenary and share out the learnings from our conversation. Each breakout group will have a facilitator from either IDEAL or our sister program Cycle Support, PCS, and a note taker. We encourage each participant to be fully present, that, if you can, if that's possible, putting your camera on, and really take the opportunity to reflect together on these recommendations. So we will have one room dedicated for USAID staff. So if you are from USAID and you don't end up in a room with Karine and me, please leave that room. And we will, you'll be put back into the main room, and someone from IDEAL will get you to the right spot. The main room will stay active as a breakout room with interpretation available. It will be facilitated in French, with French and English interpretation available. And with that, we will see you back here in 30 minutes. Half hour. I know that this is, a lot of beginning of conversations too, not wanting this to be the end. But I would love to hear out from everyone. I'm first going to call on Taka because he needs to leave soon, and then I'll ask for the volunteers from the other groups. So Taka, please share.
Thank you. First of all, would I like to acknowledge the Tufts study, and we have had different conversations with B and team over the past year. And we held a monitoring sustainability workshop last year in November, where we had some of these concerns from the M&E advisors. And we have taken steps to take some of the recommendations and some of the challenges that people have faced in implementing sustainability, especially on monitoring sustainability. On that end, we have come up with a chapter 5 in our M&E guidance that's related to monitoring sustainability that just gives M&E advisors on what to look for and the expectations from BHA. So the chapter 5 is available from the revised guidance that came in May of this year. And the second aspect is we also understand that we are building a plane as we are flying it, and it's a very complex process. So we are also having internal guidance as part of capacity building for our staff, especially the M&E staff, on how they can better be able to guide M&E advisors so that the M&E plans incorporate sustainability measurement and monitoring as part of their routine monitoring aspects in the RFSAs. We do take the recommendations seriously, and we are doing the best that we can to make sure that we address those challenges that have been highlighted. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Taka. And then can I ask for volunteer from our next group to speak up? Mara, I saw you. Are you?
Oh, did you want me to?
Oh, Corinne, please go ahead.
Just we are tag teaming it with Taka.
Yes.
And yeah, we also, in our discussion, we recognize the need for further capacity building, capacity strengthening of BHA staff, both on the technical side and our AOR side, and we see there is opportunities to do that. And then also we discussed that we saw the refinement period as being a key opportunity to really further invest and work on sustainability and really taking that recommendation of having the TOC as a key tool to integrate sustainability. This could certainly be happening during the refinement year, and that's something that we are looking at investing in more. And to say also that, we will have a follow-on event within BHA to really dig down in those recommendations. And as Taka said, that we are really taking this work and this recommendation seriously, and we want to translate that into action internally as well. So thanks.
Thank you, Corinne. Great. Eric.
Yes, I'm happy to kind of share some of the highlights from our group. I think that one of the main ones was just the need to continue to increase the evidence base around understanding sustainability. We have such a strong base already, but the need to increase it both over time, and so look at this point in time and how we're conducting RFSAs, how it changed in local context. We're basing off of a lot of good work on a few countries, but we really need to understand local context across organizations. Organizations implement differently. They have different interventions they focus on. How does that change sustainability planning, sustainability understanding? How does that change maybe how we approach the factors as well? And so just that need to continue to increase the evidence base was there. And so that was the main highlight from our group, as well as looking at the emphasis on local service providers, and what does that mean? Is how do we make sure that we cover different models within our sustainability planning and sustainability understanding, so that we don't kind of get focused in on one way to do it, especially as we go through the planning process from the proposal to the refinement year to implementation as well.
Thanks, Eric. Can I get the volunteer from the next group? Either raise your hand or Come on,
Would that
video.
be group 3?
Sure. Buck,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
So our group must have been the odd group out because we just felt like this was pretty clear and easy. So we just chatted about life and fun things most of the time. No, we had some of the same reflections in terms of building an evidence base. We posited that it would be really nice to have a repository that can be built out to allow for focusing and choosing those things that are already proving to sustain behaviors and outcomes. And with that, perhaps having some sort of a list of approaches and indicators that can be included. There's already been discussion around the monitoring and evaluation side. We talked about the possibility of there were some examples given from some of our Tufts colleagues around using the assumption tables that are included in applications and building sustainability into those. So as a way of limiting how much has to be put into the theory of change, so as not to make large and more complex and already complex documents. And then in terms of things that we are trying to do already, there was mention of partners who are funding ex post evaluations or seeing the need for more opportunities like that from our donors, and then working within those regular rhythms. So not only just in the refinement period, but in quarterly reviews and annual planning processes, having some mechanisms to be able to assess and plan for, adapt to any sort of evidence or observations that are coming out around sustainability. And that's it from our group.
Great, thank you, Buck. And for those who can I get the volunteer who was in the main room with Kayla and Suzanne?
Yeah, that's me. Stacy Frietzer with CRS based in the CRS headquarters in Baltimore. I'll just mention a couple of things that we discussed. We decided to focus on just 2 things, and this does build off of what some other peers have already said. One in particular was just that development of indicators around sustainability, it being sort of clear either from BHA or from additional learning events from other partners, what indicators or benchmarks they're using for assessing progress to sustainability. And I would put a plug in here for additional examples, not from fee-for-service models. I do think that we're getting a decent amount of those, but other types of models as well that that we're looking for in terms of sustainability. And again, that would be, and to build on that as well, the other key point that we mentioned is just that learning of what's been working. So not just the indicators and the benchmarks for sustainability, but the experience of other partners in terms of which interventions they've really seen working towards sustainability. And again, additional examples are beyond just a pay-for-service model that people have seen working as well. Just hearing from other partners, we really like to see more of that. Thank you.
Thank you, Stacy, and thank you everyone for your conversation during the breakout. Please, you know, like we said, we don't want this to be the end of the conversation on sustainability. This report was really you know, the recommendations coming out of it are intended to keep moving the conversation forward, keep moving the study and considerations forward. And we look forward to following up and seeing where things are. And we look forward to you as in activities and organizations, individuals taking forward these recommendations. So with that, I am going to hand back to Logan to close us out. Thanks again.
Thanks so much, Suzanne. I think we actually might have some time to go through some of our Q&A questions we didn't get to earlier. If I can hand it back over to the Tufts team, to Bridget, to get that started for us.
Sure. I'm going to start down at the bottom of the questions. So I see a question from Jen following on the earlier, my statement about watershed management being a place where we saw strong examples of all of the sustainability factors being described in the applications. The examples are from the applications. You will note in our report that we specifically don't identify individual applications by name. That was one of our conditions for having access to the applications. But I will say the watershed management examples came from multiple organizations, multiple applications, and to the extent that we could do more sharing events within the group of RFSAs that have already closed and are still operating. Maybe other IPs would be interested in and open to sharing. There was another question here about, do we have any findings around the perception of RFSA sustainability from the authorities or communities' points of view? So we, for the purposes of this piece of research, we did not speak to community members or authorities directly. That said, especially from our IP key informants, we heard some examples that speak to this perception. And so I don't mean to call out any particular programs, but I will say, as an example, Ethiopia was a context where when we spoke to the RFSA key informants there, they talked about the fact that there have been so many DFSAs and RFSAs in Ethiopia that they sometimes run up against some inconsistencies with thinking about sustainability. If there is a local perception that there'll just be another round of funding in the future. In another place where we saw community perceptions of sustainability come up was in the context of Zimbabwe. And the Zimbabwe RFA and its awarded RFSAs are really interesting because the RFA required a community visioning key personnel. And when we spoke to RFSA there, they talked about how that community visioning point person on the activity, as well as the activities that were carried out, especially during that refinement period, were so important for gaining community points of view around sustainability and what activities would be most likely to be sustained and where they should specifically be located in order to enhance sustainability. Anyone else from my team? Do we have time for any more questions?
Yeah, Bridget, I think we have time for one more question.
Okay. Let's see. So Mara had a question. She said, in her experience, new sustainability plans are requested in year 4, despite the substantial effort put into the original sustainability plan included in the proposal as an annex. Yes. Do you think that the originally submitted sustainability plan, if it's comprehensive and includes all 3 or 4 of the sustainability factors, could serve as a basis? We would certainly hope so, Mara. Yes, taking what you submitted in the application implementation. And our recommendation is that even during that refinement period, hopefully you're considering how the learning that if you've done community visioning, for example, in Zimbabwe where it's required, other learning activities, if you take the time during the refinement period to make any updates, and then yes, move that plan forward and re-interrogate it specifically when you're asked, whether that be in year 4 or earlier, so I think at the prep periods, you have to submit maybe some shorter narratives, re-interrogating the plan, probably at critical junctures throughout the implementation. Anything else? Any other questions?
Thanks, Bridget. I think you're working so fast. Maybe we'll which is not great for interpretation. So I think we we want to.
Sorry.
It helps us to get through the questions, but it does it makes our interpreters time a little difficult. But we do have 2 questions here. I think still remaining when I look at that I don't think we responded to. Looking at the time and how speedily you're getting to these questions, I think we can go ahead and address them so that we're not lingering with anything. And then we'll go ahead and close out. My colleague has shared in the chat a survey. So if those of you who are able, please do fill out that survey. But Bridget, I'll give you.
Okay. Let me answer. So, Angela, there's a question here about examples for how sustainability is being integrated into the theory of change. I would direct you to the report where we could give a typology of 3 ways that we see sustainability being integrated. One is using the wording of the Tufts sustainability factors, so motivation, linkages, resources, capacity, in the description of outcomes being targeted. So increase the motivation of volunteers, for example. Another way that we see sustainability in the theories of change is with some color coding and labeling, where applications specifically said, and this is an activity that they starred as being sustainability related activity. Not all activities were described that way in these particular graphics. And then we saw a final example where there were some explicit, lengthy sustainability pathways where all activities are being framed in a way to promote sustainability. So where we see something being done to sustain linkages post-program and resources, and something addressing motivation and capacity. And, this was a great example, but it made that sustainability graphic itself very complicated. And while it was great to read and we liked seeing it, doing that for all services and behaviors that you intend to sustain would make that too complex. And that's why our recommendation is maybe around thinking how to incorporate sustainability into the assumptions tables at the application point, that might be more appropriate. And can I go ahead with this last question here? Yes. Okay. Given the short timeline and the limited integration of sustainability in the culmination products, what is your recommendation about the refinement year? Are there recommendations about starting implementation earlier? We heard in numerous interviews with BHA and even reading the BHA guidance, the frequently asked questions on refinement. USAID would love for where it's possible to implementation to start earlier during refinement, and delaying implementation only in cases maybe where you need to spend more time doing community partnership building, or you need a little bit more learning about how to contextualize But you'll see that come through in our report, that to the extent that you can plan early about where you can actually launch during that implementation, that first year, that first refinement year, your implementation activities, the better, because there have been other comments here about how long sustainability takes, right? So the more time you give yourselves to implement and test what's working, the better.
Great. Thank you, Bridget. And thanks everyone for your questions. Now I really am handing it over to Logan to close it out.
Thank you so much, Suzanne, Bridget, and everyone for participating in today's event and for the very fruitful discussion that we've had today. Before we let you go, please take a minute to complete the survey that was shared in the chat if you haven't already. And as you fill out the survey, I want to share with you the link where you can find the materials from today's session, including the recording and presentation. And you can also download both the executive summary of the study and the full report at that link that Suzanne has shared in the chat. And with that, I will close it out. Thank you, everyone, so much, and goodbye. Have a great rest of your day, evening, wherever you may be. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.